I think the best way to describe open source is as a movement, as a movement of people who are passionate in um, building infrastructure.
Hi, I'm Sanskar and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new to my channel, please consider subscribing as I bring out regular content and tech content for everybody. Well, Max is a freshman at the University of Illinois and I got the opportunity to work with him at the Hack Illinois Open Source Fellowship where his team stood the first place. So I thought, why not? Let's invite him and pick his brains on how he contributes to open source and stays motivated and contributes regularly and consistently. Also, if you want to contribute to open source, there are some tips and tricks for beginners who want to unlock career opportunities and excel and contribute to open source. And listen until the very end and share views. Listen in. So, hey Max, welcome to this podcast. Thanks for joining in. How are you? What's up?
Life is good. Huh. How about you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Finally, we meet after, the time zone difference and all. Finally, we were able to find a time slot that works well for both of us. So, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So, Max, my first question to you is that I looked at your GitHub profile and you had over 1,000 contributions in the last year. So, how do you keep up with it and how do you find motivation to keep contributing and stay active?
I think it helps if you're actually interested in what you're doing. Um, I I I make a lot of my projects for myself because I'm interested in some topic. I want to play around with the new programming language. I want to implement something. I want to learn the algorithm. Um, so that helps. It also helps that
Yeah.
I have a job that uses we version our code on GitHub. It's all open source, and so that means every time I do stuff for work, it's usually public and usually is committed. So
Yeah. Great, great. So, Max, if you want to explain open source to a beginner, let's say a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, and they don't know what is open source, and you want to convince them that you should contribute to open source, so how will you explain it to them?
I think the best way to describe open source is as a movement, as a movement of people who are passionate in um, building infrastructure. I think open source software is very much like public roads or other kind of public infrastructure because open source software is the foundation on which all other software is built. Um, if you look at like Linux, I think some absurdly high percentage of servers run Linux, right? And that started off what
Yeah,
as a side project by Linus Torvalds, right?
yeah,
So open source is this kind of magical community where you get to build uh, tools not for like to help line someone else's pockets, but to kind of give back to the community and to kind of really provide a public utility. And you also have fun along the way. So I think the reason why
yeah,
someone could contribute to open source is because what you're really doing is, um, I think, I think open source software building should be viewed as a civic task, civic duty for all software engineers because it really helps to maintain our. I mean, if you like that, like if you go with the public infrastructure analogy, you're really maintaining kind of open source infrastructure.
yeah. That's a great answer, Max. Great answer. Yeah. So, Max, now coming to this Hack Illinois Open Source Fellowship through which I came to know about you. So, what is it, and how did you came to know about this fellowship, and how did you apply, and why did you apply, basically?
Well, I'm a student at the University of Illinois, so
Oh,
yeah, I heard about it from our we had a ACM open house, and I got curious. I thought, why not? Why shouldn't I? Why not? I would love to meet other open source enthusiasts, maintainers,
yeah,
etc. And yeah, that's why I applied. The Hack Illinois open source mentorship fellowship, I forget what they call it. I think they use the two interchangeably. The idea is to kind of foster new open source contributors who are kind of also passionate in open source. So you have like mentors who are paired with kind of relative newcomers, and the mentors mentor the newcomers. So that way you kind of build the community. And I thought that sounded like a pretty cool idea.
Yeah. So you worked on the project llvm and you stood first. So could you please explain about what llvm is first?
Um, llvm is probably best described as a compiler ecosystem. llvm
Right.
is composed of many different sub projects. Probably one of the most visible sub projects is Clang. Clang is a C++ compiler. But llvm is also has a bunch of other projects, and one of the kind of more experimental projects that my mentor is the de facto maintainer of is Poly, which is you can think of it as basically loop optimizer. So you have like for loops in your programming language. Turns out, when you have bunch of nested for loops, when they make the inside for loop a little faster, it has exponential effects.
Oh.
So it the idea is you can use certain optimization techniques to ensure kind of cache locality in your loops, and uh, get slightly better for loops. But because if you have like doing matrix multiplication, you have lots of nested for loops. That little improvement can net like significant improvement. Poly also and OpenMP, which is another kind of subproject Clang, also kind of work to I think the term is auto vectorize for loops. So like sometimes
Yeah.
when one iteration of the for loop does not depend on the other, you can kind of do it in parallel. And if you can detect that there's no such dependency, you can automatically do it in parallel. So essentially, the idea is we can give speedups to the end user for free. Uh,
Oh. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. So, Max, on reading through your group's messages, I found out that a couple of your teammates fell sick during the fellowship and you were the sole contributor. So, how did you stay motivated, stay focused? As in, it can rub off sometimes when your team members who are supposed to help you, but they're not helping. So, how did you manage that?
well, it was great that our tasks were we did not depend on each other. So our tasks were
Oh,
discrete, small units. And Michael was very supportive, my mentor.
yeah.
And so I had all I needed,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I tried to help out some of my fellow mentees. Actually met up with a few of them in person. So
Oh, great. That's great. Yeah. So, Max, any tips for beginners? Any special tips that because you have over 1,000 contributions, so you have any tips for beginners?
I mean, don't try not to write code for the sake of writing code. Try not to learn
Yeah,
algorithms for the
that's
sake of
great.
learning algorithms. At least when you're starting off. Uh, Write code because it's relevant to a particular interest of yours, right? If you're
Yeah.
interested in, for example, I mean, music or a kind of art, you can use code to generate art. I have some friends who got into computer science via making their own games. They were
Oh,
kind
that's
of
great.
gamers. I think they started off making like Minecraft plugins.
Oh, wow.
You know, and then they kind of they after that they're like, well, I want to make my own game, and then they got better and better, and then I think they ended up making their own ray tracer and a few other kind of cool
Wow,
projects.
that's great.
Yeah. So I mean, you kind of you should not see kind of learning how to code as your end goal, um, but rather something exciting you do along the way to accomplish your kind of main kind of interests. And I think that'll make it a lot more fun. Because you can't really learn something well unless you're having fun.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, totally agree. So, on listening to this answer, I want to know what are your hobbies? What do you like to do outside of coding? What are your hobbies?
Well, I like to play chess. Not
Oh,
that I'm not super good, but I like to play chess. I was president of my high school chess club.
wow.
But I also like reading a lot. I'm interested in politics. Actually, my job involves analyzing uh, the kind of partisan and racial gerrymandering or bias in maps.
Oh,
I don't know if you heard of gerrymandering. It's kind of a problem in the United States political
not
system
heard.
where so essentially not to get into the details, but like the idea is you have districts in America where
Yeah.
everyone in the district elects their politician to represent them.
Oh, yeah.
Um, the issue is the politicians also draw the district lines, so they can draw the
Oh,
line in a way that's favorable to them, so that their party will always win,
yeah.
or
Yeah,
or
yeah.
is more likely to
I
win.
get that.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Now I get
So
that.
the problem is, I guess it's hard to kind of objectively say whether or not a map is biased towards one political party or another, or for one race or another. Even though we know it can be
Okay.
possible, it's hard to objectively make statements about whether or not the map is politically, racially kind of biased to disenfranchise a group of people. And there are kind of algorithmic and computational techniques you can use to make those kind of statements or to kind of help those make those kind of arguments. And those arguments,
Okay.
if you have enough kind of uh, if you can make strong statements like this map is gerrymandered for to benefit this party, and if you can prove such statements in court, then it can lead to kind of results where maps are declared illegal and overturned. So what I do is I kind of work on some software that does that as part of a kind of a research lab. So um, yeah, that I'm interested in politics is kind of the long
No,
and
that's
short
very
of it.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very interesting. So, Max, you are in university, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, how are your school years? Were you always inclined towards coding, or did you build it eventually?
Well, I'm a freshman. Um, I I got interested in coding kind of seriously. Um, the like I think 1 year into high school. So
Okay.
like 3.5 maybe years ago. Um, and then it's just a little bit of an inception. So that's kind of how it turned out.
Which language did you start with?
Bash, bash shell
Oh,
scripts. Yeah, shell scripts. Um, and then one of my friends introduced me to Python, and I was like, oh, this is great. And then I realized, oh wow, there are a whole lot of other languages out there.
yeah, whole
And
lot.
yeah, a whole lot. Um, I think I really like Haskell. Haskell's I think one of my favorite to work with. Haskell and Rust. I think I'm probably most, I guess, fluent is the right word. I'm most fluent in Python. But any excuse I get to learn more stuff in Rust or just to use Rust, I'll jump at that. And any chance to write stuff in Haskell, I'll also jump at that. The problem is, not a lot of other people are kind of like people in the lab are not really a big fan of me writing code in Rust or Haskell because, well, um, I think at work you have different priorities with you want other people to be able to read your code base. So yeah.
Yeah. What I think is that Python basically, it overlaps things in such a way that a student cannot, gain the concepts behind it. He just, grabs the thing at the surface layer. You can't go deep in Python. That's what I believe. That what's your point of view with Python?
I think with Python you can do quite nice. You can do pretty complicated abstractions. Like I mean, it's a fully fledged OOP language. You can do a decent amount of functional programming with it. Um, I mean, they're like, it's not like the best OOP language. It's not the best functional programming
Yeah,
language. Nowhere near the
yeah,
best, right? But it's a good, I would say, like prototyping language, and it's a good like language for beginners because it like you're right. You don't have to get into how like the interpreter, the Python interpreter actually works. Like you'll never have to learn like memory
Yeah, that's what
management
I.
in Python. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, there are cases where you don't understand how it works, but by and large, you can get by without understanding how the Python garbage collector works or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, Max, so what are your future plans? Anything you're planning for the future?
Future plans. Getting through school, I think, is a good future plan.
That's a good future plan.
Um,
Yeah,
I don't know. I want to be an entrepreneur, so I
that's
think
great.
after I graduate or maybe sometime in the next couple of years, I may like I don't know I like working on group projects, so I think that joining a startup or starting a startup would be kind of my immediate to short term future.
Great, great, great. Okay, Max, anything you want to add? I think I'm done with my question bank. Anything that you have for our listeners, for our audience, student entrepreneurs, you want to add?
Uh no, I mean not really. I think that you had a pretty comprehensive question list. Um, I think people shouldn't get discouraged when they kind of say, oh, there's like when they see there's so much to learn in CS. I
Yeah,
think it's all very approachable if you take it one step at a time. Um, I mean, when I first started out, I was like, oh, this Python language looks cool, looks confusing, but looks cool. And I was like, well, I'm gonna make it my goal to write all my stuff in Python until I really get it. And so here I am now. I think I understand Python quite well.
yeah,
Learned all the kind of fancy metaprogramming tricks and all that. But I think that the best way to pick up a language is just to just code in it. Don't be afraid. Like I think people should not like. Some people like to study languages like abstractly, like read through the documentation and then read through like the tutorials before
yeah,
writing
yeah,
code. I think the
yeah,
first thing they should do is write code. They should just write code, write more of
yep,
it, and
exactly,
learn all the concepts they need along the way.
exactly. Also, one thing I want to add to this is that, we need to give it time because coding takes time. In this fellowship only, I had an, error with Docker. I wasn't able to run my project locally. And I asked this, error to my mentor, to the ones who are maintainers of the project on GitHub. Even they couldn't help me out. So I realized that even if you are into coding for a long period of time, then also you will face errors which will give you pain, which will give you headaches. So you can't be discouraged by that. You just need to face it and keep trying, keep on exploring. That's the only way you'll get to the end goal.
Yeah. I also, in terms of advice for like beginner to intermediate people, I think it's important to understand and really fully, I don't know, get familiar with the tools you use. So, I mean, I'm a Emacs user, and I I think it's like I believe like that you should be very deliberate about the tools you pick. I started
Yeah,
off I think with
agreed.
Atom, and then I used VS Code for a bit. Then I used Sublime, and then I used Vim, and then finally I settled on Emacs. So there's a long journey to get here, but like I think it's okay to be picky with the tools you use because if you're gonna be like you know sitting in that IDE or that like editor for hours and hours on end, that's going to be your kind
Agreed.
of like if you're think of yourself as a craftsman, if a carpenter does not know how to use a hammer, that carpenter is not going to have a very happy time building houses, right? So you should really understand the tools you use. You should understand them well. You should be okay to kind of spend the time, the upfront investment into learning your tools and really understanding your tools and trying out new tools. And I think uh, if you do that, you'll see lots of kind of productivity gains later on, and it's really important. And I think that that's what kind of that's my philosophy. You should like, especially if all you do is code, or like you code a lot, like you really got to learn how your IDE works, all the idiosyncrasies of your IDE. You got to learn what plugins work for you, what plugins don't work for you. You got to really kind of always be focused on ensuring that you're maximizing productivity because no one likes to like uh, deal with like a kind of environment issue because you're like I know, Python, right? Python environments are a little bit of a mess, right? But
Yeah.
if you don't understand how virtual env works, then you're gonna have a really painful time working on different projects and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Love the carpenter analogy though.
Yeah,
Basically, listeners, what Max is trying to say is that you need to spend time with your fundamentals. You can't skip to the, with tech, there's always new things coming out. You can't just jump onto things. You need to strengthen your basics, strengthen your fundamentals, and then you can move forward whichever direction you want. Right, Max?
yeah. And also with regards to like a lot of people think, oh, you have to kind of buy a fancy laptop or use like the latest
Yeah,
hardware to code, and that is totally not the
agreed.
case. I think in 10th grade or 11th grade, there was a solid 6 months where I was using a Chromebook. Um, and that was because the Chromebook battery is fantastic. The battery life is fantastic, and if you are just remotely SSHing into a server and doing all your work on a server, like actually a Chromebook fits your needs perfectly. A cheap $150 Chromebook, if you drop it, you break it, sure, it's fine. It's not. It's cheaper,
Yep.
and battery life is fantastic. So I have to say, like, you don't have to get like a super expensive fancy computer or whatever. Um, it you can like I saw this article on Hacker News where someone was learning how to code on like a kind of cheap like 10-20 year old like phone or something like that, and they hooked up
Oh,
like a keyboard to the phone, and they put the phone in front of their face and they just code on the in the terminal of their like Android phone that's like 10 years old or something. And I was thinking, like, if that guy can do it, certainly you don't need the latest like Apple M1 Max
yeah.
Pro
You don't
new
need that, right?
generation whatever fancy
Yep.
thing. Yeah.
Great, Max. Great. It was great having you. Great listening to your insights, to your experience. For our listeners as well, I'm sure they will get a lot out of it and start contributing to open source and also help others to start contributing to open source. It was great having you here, Max.